I demand an explanation now, Doctor. What happened? What did you do?
Sorry, Michael. We tried our best. We applied our method, which I told you.
I told you this not gonna work. You should have listened to me. I lost her because of you. You incompetent. But you will not accept that.
No, Michael, I am not incompetent. I am a professional medical doctor with years of experience.
Pay attention to the people on camera. Capture a brink of a tragic end. What begins as a heated argument ends in tragedy and a sense of betrayal. In the stillness of a suburban neighborhood, two figures stand in the frame of a security camera, their presence captured at the brink of a tragic end. The man, Michael Reynolds, a 38-year-old mechanic, stands visibly agitated toward the woman standing opposite him. The woman arguing with him from the other end is Dr. Eleanor Parker, a highly respected 41-year-old heart surgeon. What neither of them knows, not yet, is that these would be the final moments of Dr. Parker's life. The CCTV camera records the scene as Michael, his eyes filled with rage, confronts the woman who, for him, symbolizes everything that went wrong in his life. The next moments are fleeting, but for Michael, they represent the culmination of years of grief and injustice. A few minutes later, Dr. Parker would fall to the ground, her life extinguished in an instant. At precisely 7:07 a.m. on January 15, 2000, the local police dispatch in Crestwood received a frantic call. The caller, breathless and panicked, reported, wasn't fleeing in panic, but walking away slowly, his footsteps deliberate and unnervingly calm. The first police units to arrive on the scene found something far more unsettling than what they expected. No high-speed pursuit, no frenzied escape, only a man whose actions were so coldly executed, so methodical, that they seemed rehearsed. Dr. Eleanor Parker had once been the shining star of Crestwood Memorial Hospital. At 41, she had it all: respect, wealth, and an impeccable reputation as a top heart surgeon. Her success was not just professional, it was a reflection of her life. She owned a multi-million-dollar home in the prestigious Heights district, drove a sleek silver BMW, and rubbed elbows with the city's elite at gala events. To the public, she was the epitome of success. But beneath this as polished exterior, cracks began to show. Dr. Parker's interactions with patients, especially those from lower income brackets, painted a very different picture. While wealthy, private pay patients received undivided attention and care, those relying on government-funded insurance, like Medicaid, were often treated with disregard. Time and again, patients described her as cold, dismissive, and uninterested in their concerns. In the world of the wealthy, she was a trusted medical professional, but in the waiting rooms of her office, where the less fortunate sat, she was a symbol of the divide between privilege and poverty. Stark contrast would soon collide with a man whose world had been shattered by loss, and who would soon be driven to extremes. Michael Reynolds, at 38, was a simple man, a hard-working auto mechanic with a modest life. His world revolved around one person: his mother, Maria Reynolds, the only family he had left. After his wife died in a tragic accident years earlier, Maria became the sole focus of his life. Maria, a strong, vibrant woman, had immigrated from Italy and worked for years as a seamstress. She had spent her life putting others first, and now it was Michael's turn to care for her. In late 1998, when Maria was diagnosed with a serious heart condition, aortic valve stenosis, Michael's world shifted. The promise of surgery to save her life became his only hope. On January 5, 1999, Michael accompanied his mother to a consultation with Dr. Eleanor Parker. They arrived at the hospital, waiting in the polished waiting room, observing as Dr. Parker spent a generous amount of time with a well-dressed couple ahead of them. They laughed, exchanged pleasantries, and seemed to have Dr. Parker's full attention. When Michael and Maria's turn finally came, the mood shifted drastically. The consultation lasted barely 10 minutes. Dr. Parker barely looked at Maria, her words directed solely at Michael, as though his mother's concerns didn't matter. Maria, trying to ask a simple question about her condition, was met with irritation. When Michael asked about the surgery risks, the response was curt and dismissive. Dr. Parker, it seemed, had already made up her mind about who was worthy of her time. This wasn't a simple case of poor bedside manner. For Michael, it was the unmistakable sign that his mother, the person he loved most in the world, was being treated as less important simply because she didn't have private insurance. The surgery was scheduled, but Michael left the office feeling an unease that would grow with each passing day. On the morning of March 9th, 1999, Maria Reynolds was admitted for her surgery. Michael reassured her, promising everything would be fine, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Dr. Parker arrived late, as hospital records would later confirm, and the surgery began an hour behind schedule. For the first hour, things appeared routine, but at 9:52 a.m., the first signs of trouble emerged. Dr. Parker made a critical error. She miscalculated the size of the prosthetic valve, forcing it into place despite its clear mismatch. And then, while suturing the incision, she made another mistake. She accidentally punctured the coronary artery. A serious but potentially survivable mistake, if caught in time. Unfortunately, it wasn't caught in time. By 10:34 a.m., alarms blared in the operating room as Maria's blood pressure plummeted. Internal bleeding had set in, caused by the two unaddressed errors. Despite frantic attempts to repair the damage, it was too late. At 11:03 a.m., Maria Reynolds was pronounced dead. Less than 30 minutes later, Michael was sitting alone in the waiting room when Dr. Parker walked in. Her demeanor was cold, clinical. She told him that his mother's heart couldn't handle the surgery, and that sometimes these things just happen. She offered no apology, no explanation, and no comfort. With that, she turned on her heels and walked away. The days that followed were an agonizing blur for Michael. His grief was deep, but it was compounded by something else. A bill for $80,000 for the surgery that had killed his mother. Her limited insurance barely covered a fraction of the cost, and despite his attempts to reach Dr. Parker and the hospital for an explanation, he was met with silence. Frustrated and desperate for answers, Michael hired a lawyer to investigate. The report he received confirmed his worst fears. Dr. Parker's errors had been fatal. The case was clear, but when he pursued a lawsuit, the hospital's legal team fought back hard, claiming that Maria's death was the result of her pre-existing conditions, not the doctor's mistakes. As the months passed, Michael's frustration grew. The legal system seemed to fail him at every turn. Finally, in a desperate bid for justice, he accepted a settlement offer, a paltry sum that barely covered the funeral expenses. But Michael's grief, fueled by a sense of injustice, didn't end there. The man who had once been quiet and reserved slowly transformed. He began spending his days alone, consumed by anger. His small apartment became a shrine to his mother. Her photos, legal documents, and newspaper clippings scattered across the floor. The legal battles, though they had exhausted him, only deepened his obsession. And soon he began driving by Dr. Parker's house, watching her every move. By December, Michael had a plan. He bought a gun, familiarized himself with it at a shooting range, and began tracking Dr. Parker's every move. It was methodical, cold, and calculated. On the morning of December 28th, 1999, Michael Reynolds finally made his move. He walked up to Dr. Parker as she was about to go for a run, his gun concealed in his jacket. As she recognized him, her dismissive attitude, the same one that had haunted Michael since the first consultation, pushed him over the edge. In that moment, he pulled the trigger. 3 shots rang out, and Dr. Parker fell to the ground. Michael stood over her, emotionless. The neighbor's security cameras captured the entire scene, from the confrontation to the final moments of Dr. Parker's life. The police found Michael just a few blocks away. Sitting calmly in his truck, he surrendered without resistance, admitting to the crime in a cold, detached manner. "I did it. I killed her," he said. "She killed my mother, and nobody cared." As the case unfolded, it was clear that Michael Reynolds was not just a killer. He wasn't a man broken by a system that had failed him. His trial sparked heated debates about justice, malpractice, and the deep flaws in both the healthcare and legal systems. As the trial unfolded, Michael Reynolds found himself at the center of a storm. His grief and anger had driven him to take a life, but the courtrooms and public opinion had turned him into something more, a symbol of a flawed system. The prosecution presented their case clearly and concisely. Michael had carefully planned his actions: the gun purchase, the surveillance of Dr. Parker, the letters he had written in preparation for the act. It all pointed to premeditation, a cold and calculated response to the injustices he had suffered. The prosecution painted him as a vigilante who had taken matters into his own hands, someone who had become judge, jury, and executioner. They made sure to highlight the disturbing nature of the crime: a man driven by a singular obsession, unable to let go of his past. His actions, they argued, were unforgivable. On the other side of the courtroom, Michael's defense team worked to present a different narrative. They argued that Michael was not a cold-blooded killer, but a man driven to the edge by overwhelming grief and a profound sense of betrayal. His mother's death was not just a medical mistake. It was a symptom of a larger, broken system, one that failed him, failed his mother, and failed countless others like them. Michael's defense attorney, a seasoned lawyer with experience in medical malpractice cases, brought forth the details of Dr. Parker's history. He pointed to her previous malpractice settlements and the damning report from Dr. Raymond Pfizer, the independent surgeon who had confirmed that Maria's death could have been prevented. The evidence painted a picture of a surgeon who had grown complacent, who had allowed her privilege and wealth to cloud her judgment, and who had failed to recognize the humanity of those less fortunate. The public defender spoke passionately about the neglect that Michael had faced in his pursuit of justice. He argued that Michael had been betrayed, not just by Dr. Parker, but by the entire legal and medical system. The lawsuit had been dismissed on technicalities. The settlement had been a slap in the face, and in the end, Michael had nothing left but the overwhelming anger that came from being powerless in a world that seemed to care so little for people like him. For Michael, the trial became a moment of reckoning. Against his lawyer's advice, he decided to take the stand. As he stood before the jury, his voice was raw and trembling with emotion. "I know I did something wrong," he said, his words cutting through the silence. "I know what I did wasn't right, but I want you to understand. My mother died because Dr. Parker didn't think she was important enough to care about. She didn't think her life mattered. And when I lost her, I lost everything." His words hung in the air, a raw confession of the pain that had consumed him for so long. In the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The jury, the defense, and even the prosecution were forced to confront the depth of Michael's suffering. But despite the emotional weight of his testimony, Michael knew there would be no easy resolution. The legal system, as it had done so many times before, had shown its flaws. But it was now up to the jury to decide how much weight to give to Michael's grief, to his broken heart, to the profound sense of injustice he had suffered. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some felt Michael deserved the conviction, while others believed his actions were the result of deep emotional distress. The judge, in delivering the sentence, acknowledged the pain that had driven Michael to commit the crime. But ultimately, he stated, the law had to be upheld. Michael was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, a sentence that would take him into his late 50s and perhaps beyond. For Michael, thus, the sentencing was a bitter pill to swallow. There was no justice, no sense of closure, just the harsh reality of a prison sentence that would mark the rest of his life. But as the years passed, something shifted within him. Over time, he became a model prisoner, working in the prison's legal aid office and helping other inmates navigate the complicated legal system. His time behind bars allowed him to reflect on the choices he had made, and while he could never undo what had happened, he found a sense of purpose in helping others. Despite his transformation, Michael was denied parole 3 times, each denial forcing him to confront the weight of his past and the consequences of his actions. But in 2024, after serving nearly 25 years, Michael was granted parole at the age of 63. Outside the walls of prison, the world had changed. The case of Michael Reynolds and Dr. Eleanor Parker had become a landmark in discussions about medical malpractice, justice, and the ways in which systems failed vulnerable people. The hospital where Dr. Parker had worked, Crestwood Memorial, quietly revised its policies after the public outcry, especially following the unsealing of Dr. Parker's previous malpractice settlements. Internal reviews showed that Dr. Parker's behavior, the negligence that led to Maria Reynolds' death, was not an isolated incident. In fact, it was part of a pattern that had gone unchecked for years, protected by her status, wealth, and reputation. The hospital faced pressure to address these systemic issues, but for many, the damage had already been done. Maria Reynolds was dead, and Michael Reynolds had lost everything. For Michael, life after prison wasn't easy. His release didn't bring the closure he had hoped for. He had spent decades thinking about his mother, about the pain of losing her, and about the crime that had followed. His guilt and his grief had never fully left him. But in his newfound freedom, he did his best to honor her memory. Now, as a volunteer at a legal aid clinic, Michael worked to help families who found themselves in the same position he had been in so many years ago. Families who had been failed by the system, by the people they trusted to care for them. His work wasn't just about the law. It was about preventing others from experiencing the same anguish he had gone through. And in a strange way, it was his way of making up for the tragedy that had shaped his entire life.